Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
Well, welcome to this week's Climate and Coordination RCAST. We are going to continue talking about a variety of topics today that we think are important and interesting. And the first one that I have today, I just put it in the chat for everybody to see. This is a story from The Guardian, which has been really making its way around the internet. And I think it's an absolutely great story that really focuses a lot about the rewilding efforts. And kind of where we are with that and why we need them and sort of what it all means. And also a bit of an update on where some countries are around the world at these rewilding efforts. So the headline here is "World must rewild on a massive scale to heal nature and climate," says the UN. This is from June 3rd. So basically it opens by saying the world must rewild and restore an area the size of China to meet commitments on nature and the climate, says the UN, and the revival of ecosystems must be met with all the ambition of the space race. So basically it's kind of opening by saying we need to rewild, and also some people might call this pro-forest because it's not really replanting trees. It's basically just trying to leave these areas alone and provide more protection so they can basically recover on their own. But also, in some cases, planting the trees might be necessary if things are really, really depleted. It says here governments must deliver on a commitment to restore at least 1 billion hectares, which is 2.47 billion acres of land by 2030. Which is in, 8.5 years, and make a similar pledge for the oceans. So that basically means that not only do we need to protect huge portions of land, we also need to protect huge portions of the oceans. It says here, humans are using about 1.6 times the resources that nature can sustainably renew every year. And the UN said that short-term economic gains are being prioritized over the health of the planet, pretty obvious. But it's interesting that we have a figure that we're using basically 600% more resources than can be renewed every year. Obviously using the full 100 and then 600% of the full 100. So I've never seen that figure before, but I'm very interested about that. Also, it says here that half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature, and the degradation of ecosystems is affecting about 40% of the world's population. So I didn't know that half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature. I actually thought that it might be a little bit more, especially when you count in like sort of indirect climate stability into, the daily lives of people and the economy. But maybe that half figure, 50%, is really just talking about sort of the direct ways that climate can support our economies, like with farming and tourism and other stuff that's more direct, but I'm not sure. But I thought that was really fascinating for people to know. And it just goes on to give a little bit of an update on what is happening with these projects. It says the report notes that while restoration science is in its infancy, agroforestry and other sustainable farming practices are already well understood and can be scaled up. The UN has said it will work with governments to highlight flagship restoration projects to inspire the ambition required, which I think is a great step forward to just at least identify the most important areas. And then it just goes on to explain who is really doing the work right now. Countries have committed to restoring 1 billion hectares of degraded land, roughly the area of China, according to a study by the Dutch Environmental Assessment Agency. Many of these pledges have been made in countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, China, and South Asia, with relatively few made by Western nations, Russia, and those of the Middle East. So obviously, Europe and the United States and Canada and other places need to do a lot more. Also, they talked about the Great Green Wall in Africa, which is basically an idea to sort of reforest 100 million hectares of degraded land, basically across sort of that stretch of northern Africa, which I know there's been some progress on. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention here. Oh yeah, just one more thing. It says last week, the UN State of Finance for Nature report found that the world needs to quadruple its annual investment in nature if the climate biodiversity and land degradation crises are to be tackled by the middle of the century. It highlighted a finance gap of about $4 trillion that needed to be closed to avoid the breakdown of natural ecosystem, quote, services, such as clean water, food, and flood protection. I just love that they call our environment services, natural ecosystem services. But that's really actually what they are. These are not luxuries, but they're actually, bedrocks on which society is built. But I love that they call them services so that we can realize that they really do serve us. And I'm really excited about these rewilding efforts because I feel that this is going to be one of the major keys, in addition to obviously rapid technological development and decarbonization. I think the rewilding efforts are a major pillar within what we're doing. So I'd love to hear if there are any comments about this. I really enjoyed reading this one, though. It gave me some hope.
Oh man, if Steve Ross Talbot was here, he'd jump all over this. He's super pro rewilding. In fact, I don't think I knew about the term until Steve Ross Talbot started talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there are a lot of different ways to approach it, but I think all of them are really positive, and I'm excited to see what happens with this global project because, we don't have that much time left to do it, but it seems like people are trying to commit to do it. And one great thing about it is the forests are already here, right? So we just need to let them, literally we have to do nothing, but that's hard for us. So I do have a second story here that I wanted to share. And it really is kind of a continuation off of what we were talking about last week about oil and why on God's green earth there is an increase in oil production and an increase in oil value on the stock market and other places. And this is by Bill McKibbon from June 16th in the New Yorker. Obviously, Bill McKibbon is a very famous climate sort of activist, or I guess we could say a climate communicator. And this piece is fairly long and really touches on a lot of different subjects. But the main thing I wanted to first talk about was that the title here is that everyone wants to sell the last barrel of oil. And of course they do, because nobody wants to leave any money on the table. It says here, the Keystone XL win, which is the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline, and the Line 3 battle, which is another pipeline, I think, going through Minnesota, make clear that cutting off the supply of oil is a key part of the climate fight because there's so much, pushback on that. So basically, I just wanted to first explain that the Line 3 pipeline is a proposed pipeline going through Minnesota, and there's already a ton of opposition to it, and there's a lot of indigenous groups that are getting involved because, as usual, with environmental racism being rampant in the United States and other places around the world, usually these projects go through neighborhoods of minority communities, which is totally unfair. And they know that in general, richer neighborhoods and whiter neighborhoods really don't want these projects to go through their neighborhoods. So it's just totally unfair that these indigenous people and others are having to deal with all this crap in their backyard. Anyway, so the Line 3 pipeline was proposed by a company called Enbridge Energy, which is a Canadian company. And we're not sure what's going to be the fate of that because people are really pushing back against it. So hopefully that will be another domino to fall. But there are a lot of other new existing oil projects. It says here in Norway, Russia, Uganda, Nigeria, Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Vietnam, and other places. So obviously there's still a lot of work to do to make sure that these projects don't continue, and to find people other jobs that are hopefully not only better for the environment, but are hopefully also higher quality jobs where people don't have to, deal with these toxic substances all day. Then he goes into basically a little bit of a question and answer with Resilient Indigenous Sisters in Raging, which is a group called RISE. And basically they have been protesting this Line 3 pipeline in person. So that was great. And then, this also ties into what you mentioned last week, Darryl, about the hydroelectric plants. It says here, the level of Lake Mead in Nevada is falling to historic lows, and the drought in the West is getting deeper and scarier. Also, there's trouble with the level of the Colorado River basin. And basically, this article is just tying in the drought in the West, which is something that's really serious. And, I just think people need to understand that there's real consequence to burning these fossil fuels. And people often say, especially in the media, they're like, oh, wow, it's a really hot year. But I'm not hearing a lot of connection to the climate crisis when people talk about drought and when people talk about fires and when people talk about heat. I just don't think that there's not a major connection made to the overarching climate crisis. And I really wish that the media would do a better job in that. And then just the final thing I wanted to mention in this article, and there's a lot more, so I really encourage anyone to read it. It says Tracy Lewis, a senior climate policy analyst for 350.org, argues in the American Prospect that it's time for a new Federal Reserve chair. So this is interesting. I haven't seen this before, but the Fed chair, Jay Powell, people are saying that basically we need a Federal Reserve chair who is more aggressive on climate. And Jay Powell has said that, he understands that climate is a huge financial risk and that it's getting worse. So he's definitely not a climate skeptic or a denier. But this person, Tracy Lewis, really thinks that it's time for a new chair. It says, it's clear that President Biden needs to appoint a new Fed chair who will be committed to addressing the ways that climate change creates systemic risk and to be committed to the Fed's mandate to mitigate that risk. So I think that Jay Powell understands climate risk, but especially the financial side, but it seems like there might be a movement to replace him. So I'll be interested to follow that. I don't really have an opinion on that yet, but I'm really interested to see where that goes. And so I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any comments. And I know, Darryl, you had a story that you wanted to also share that connects to this.
Yeah, I don't know about the Jay Powell thing that you're talking about. I have to do some more research on that. But in response to the article that you were talking about from the New Yorker, it's directly connected to the country that I'm from, and the oil sands project here in Canada, in the province of Alberta. And James Hansen, the climate scientist who is kind of credited as discovering the CO2 situation by studying Venus for NASA. He said that pumping Alberta dry would be game over for the climate. So Alberta's oil has long been a powerful force in Canadian politics, Alberta is kind of like the Texas of Canada. So because they controlled so much of Canada's oil, they also controlled a lot of say in politics. But that influence has been slowly fading, but was still quite strong up until recently. Our current Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, could be considered a strong advocate of climate change mitigation, though many consider it to be lip service due to his continued ongoing support of the pipeline. In many ways, I sympathize with his position because of that political clout I just spoke of. But with the recent announcement of the death of the Keystone XL, Alberta just had that influence lobbed off at its knees. So it's kind of an interesting situation now. For a long time, Alberta was considered by many other provinces to be kind of a bully in kind of, ramming their more conservative policies through because they controlled so much of the country's energy. They no longer have that kind of, that power has just been, rapidly removed from them. And I would say here in Canada, what we should do with Alberta is instead of, plotting some kind of revenge or, approaching it with an aggressive pushback, we should embrace them and we should help Alberta transition to other renewable energy sources. So, I believe that federal tax money should be spent on subsidies for helping Alberta deal with this crisis that they're now in as far as their own source of income. And it looks like the free market has stepped in so far. There's an article called "Construction Begins on New Southern Alberta Solar Farm," and Amazon, the company, is planning on purchasing it. So Amazon announced Wednesday it will purchase power from a massive new solar farm in Alberta, making the e-commerce giant's second renewable energy investment in Canada. Construction began Wednesday on Traverse Solar, a $700 million, 465 megawatt project in Vulcan County, which developers say will be the largest solar photovoltaic project in Canada and one of the largest in the world. Privately held Greengate Power Corporation of Calgary says the solar farm will consist of 1.3 million solar panels and will provide enough electricity to power more than 100,000 homes by 2022. And here's a quote from Jeff Bezos. "We're driving hard to fulfill the climate pledge, our commitment to reach net zero carbon by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement. Our investments in wind and solar energy in the US and around the world send a signal that investing in green technologies is the right thing to do for the planet and citizens, as well as for the long-term success of businesses of all sizes across all industries everywhere." So Alberta has a lot of solar. It gets a lot of sun and it gets a lot of wind because it's butted right up to the Rocky Mountains, and Calgary in particular is famous for its Chinook winds. So they have the resources for renewable energy. So I think this could be a really good example of the kind of transition that could occur if we embrace the people who were once using oil as kind of drivers for their political agenda, instead of shooting them down or plotting revenge. Give them a big hug and help them out, because I think that's the solution. So that's what I had to say about that.
That's awesome. So is Amazon actually purchasing that company or that facility, or are they just hiring them to basically power their factories? Or did you see exactly what was going on with that? It sounds like a great development.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like they're using it yet to purchase power. They're purchasing power from this solar farm.
Yeah, that's great. I think most of the Amazon warehouses, although there's tons of criticism that is legitimate about them, I think most of them run on renewable energy. I don't know if that's totally true across the board, but I know that that's what they were really trying to do. So hopefully this is another step. And also, any time that a major investment like that is made in clean energy, especially in a place like Canada, where there is a lot of oil, I feel that it really can help transform the local economy, right? Because it's injecting money into those industries in places that are fighting back against a totally oil-based economy. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
I feel like the people in and around those places see those investments happening. They'll see new capital, large amounts of new hundreds of millions of dollars of new capital being injected into these new industries. And I think that might provide, some hope for people there as well.
Yeah, I mean, if they can't accept the science and they're just don't care about it, at least they'll see the money coming in, and that might get them excited.
Yeah. I mean, I think that obviously we don't, I don't think any of us believe that, the reason to save the climate is for, financial purposes, but you really can't discount that money really can influence people for good. And I think something that we have talked about a lot on this call in the past is like a paradigm shift or, a sea change or whatever in the way that people coordinate and organize and the priorities that we have. But I think another thing that might be interesting is to explore a paradigm shift of money being used to do bad things versus money being used to do good things. Maybe in the future, we're going to see that capital is being used for a purpose that we really believe in. Obviously, that's not going to be, 100% true. There's always going to be nefarious things done with money. But I just think maybe money isn't always the problem. Maybe we can make money, a catalyst for something good.
Yep.
Amen.
Oh, hello, Greg.
Hey.
How are you doing?
Good.
Oh,
yeah.
Good.
Well, there's Charles Eisenstein has written an interesting book, Sacred Economics, in which he explores the themes that you're talking about to a considerable degree. And certainly, I think one of the most interesting things about blockchain is that it changes our relationship to money. It brings to the fore its power as a coordination mechanism, as a coordination technology, and removes a lot of the things about money that are so challenging. In particular, in order to have fiat currency, you have to have a standing army and a police force. Whereas in order to have cryptocurrency or blockchain, you have to have some algorithms. And I think that's a real shift. It's a paradigm shift in and of itself, which then feeds back into the desire to use money to coordinate and inspire the right kind of behavior. And by right, I mean the behavior that doesn't kill the planet.
Yeah. Do you think that is inherent in all blockchain technology? Or do you feel that even, continuing on the idea that we don't want to provide any, censorship or anything like that, do you think it's possible that some blockchains might further incentivize people to do, I don't want to say good behavior, that sounds weird, but I would say behavior that, positively impacts the collective? Do you think that some blockchains somehow have the ability to sort of maybe not encourage that, but inspire that or some way?
So that's a very interesting question. I mean, just from a pure technological discussion, even algorithms as inefficient and bad in terms of energy consumption as Bitcoin, you have to compare Bitcoin to the combination of the Pentagon and all the military apparatus of all the world, and then look at the climate impacts of all those operations to see the balance of Bitcoin against fiat currency. Does that make sense?
Wow, I'd never thought I'd hear Greg defend Bitcoin for its climate impact.
I'm not defending it for its climate impact. I think it's but I do think that people have to you have to, if you're just looking at it from a technological perspective, algorithms beat standing armies.
Right.
Right. I mean, them's there, the economics.
Yeah.
But
maybe that's another possible RChain slogan: algorithms, not armies.
Yeah, exactly.
But Shixi on the t-shirt.
Well, we actually did that for our 2018 the Boulder conference, the first DevCon that we did. We the back of the t-shirt was, or the front of the t-shirt, I think, was it was a picture of the Fed, and it said, "I will replace you with a smart contract."
Oh.
There's, if you just look at it from that perspective, I think that's one angle, but there are other angles, right? So one of the things that's most interesting is the connection between the kind of money or economic mechanism that you get and its relationship to governance, because you can't just have a standing army, for example, without it somehow being connected to some political apparatus, either the will of the people or the will of a dictator or what have you. But that the connection between the monetary mechanism and the governance mechanism is inextricable. And so there are blockchains that make that more explicit. Like it was only kind of accidental in the case of Bitcoin. There wasn't a well thought out governance mechanism. And I think that same blind spot was, overtook Ethereum. They didn't really have a good governance model laid out. And then there are other blockchains who, in hindsight, said governance really needs to be a part of what we think about. So there are projects like Tezos, which try to bake it into the protocol. And then there are projects like RChain, where we realize that part of it is the protocol, but part of it has to be the entity itself, that part of it must be a social mechanism, which is why we're a cooperative. So I think the one thing that the blockchain has the ability to make this a central dialogue, and a global dialogue, right? It doesn't, I'm saddened when I see the press focused on people getting rich off of Bitcoin or NFTs, making hundreds of millions for Christie's and Sotheby's. I'm much more interested if the press would bring to the fore some of these other facts that we've just uncovered in like 2 seconds of consideration, right? Algorithms, not not armies, right? That's enough. That's pithy enough to wrap a New York Times article around it. But then to go a little bit deeper into the relationship between some monetary mechanism and governance, and how they have to be, they're recursively intertwined. So I think that that is an important discussion, and there are some projects that have, their thinking is a little bit more evolved, and the communities that have formed around them have likewise begun to adopt and engage that thinking. Just long-winded answer, but does that answer your question?
That does make more sense to me. I just feel like it's amazing to me that even with these new algorithms, and I just feel like blockchain still feels very futuristic to some people, but to me it feels like it could still be very entrenched. Do you know what I mean? And that, especially what you said about media constantly just focusing on this like sort of meaningless, who's like who won the lottery. I mean, it's just like so small-minded compared to what really, lies beneath. I feel like, sometimes I talk to people and I explain things a little further, even though I'm not, an expert. And they're like, oh, wow, I had no idea. And I'm like, yeah, there's like a lot more to it than just gambling, And I agree with you that it's really sad that the media doesn't really take more of an opportunity to really educate people on the possibilities for technology, but especially for blockchain, that it's really just about gambling. But I just feel like it's amazing to me how fast all this stuff can become entrenched. Like social media was supposed to be so futuristic, and I feel it's super entrenched, in all of these toxic systems and corruption. And it's just surprising to me how fast that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the fascinating debate in blockchain circles around the world about to have government or to not have government. You could argue even in the Bitcoin white paper, there's a bit of an anarcho-capitalist bent to it. Apparently, the inspiration was when the response to the 2008 massive financial crisis that happened when Obama first entered office, and Obama's basic he was essentially forced to take the people's money and bail out the banks with it. There's those images of Hank Paulson and standing in front of Obama, looking literally like the angel of death, going, yeah, you have to pay up now. And so, apparently that was the fuel that inspired Satoshi Nakamoto to create Bitcoin. The idea that, the banks can be so powerful and can force the biggest economy in the world to use the taxpayers' money to bail them out. And so, like, there's just this kind of a large number of blockchain advocates, I think, fancy themselves as libertarians, or they think they're libertarians, but they're actually anarcho-capitalists. And I find that kind of focus and angle, fascinating. I don't particularly subscribe to it myself. I appreciate the sentiment, but like I said before, when I was in my 20s and I was, into punk rock, I liked bands like Crass, who were like, anarchists. They're more left-wing anarchists, but, so I kind of started reading up on anarchy and the idea of anarchy being peaceful coexistence with each other without the need for government. A lot of people equate anarchy with chaos, but my perspective in my 20s was that, anarchy actually represents peace. It represents coexistence without the need for government. So, I was a peace-loving hippie punk who believed in anarchism. But, as I got older, I started to kind of understand the need for government. And then my focus started to become more on how to improve democracy, how to help with better decision-making, because anarchism in many ways is an ideal that can be rapidly become a religion, but not really represent reality much. So I don't know, this is kind of long-winded, but I'm trying to get to the place where we are right now. Here we are right now today, where you have arguably the largest economy in the world, what most people are calling the second largest economy in the world, clamping down on Bitcoin mining and in the places where they think they can clamp down on, and actually they are succeeding at clamping down on. And I remember back in the late 90s when the web, blew up and people were spouting a lot of the same kind of fantastical idealistic ideas as they are today with blockchain, talking about how it's going to be a great, intermediator dissolving. It's going to, dissolve the middlemen. It's going to disrupt everything. All the power structures are going to be disrupted by the web. We might not need government anymore. Might not need corporations anymore. Like there was a lot of that same kind of like wild idealism that we're seeing today and now even with NFTs, it's even kind of raised that up again. A lot of people discussing all sorts of interesting, viewpoints and ideals about what could happen. But I do think that for those of us who lived through that web period, the powers that be have a lot of strength still. And so I think that working with government is the solution for any blockchain project. And that's just my opinion, but I don't see it as a battle against. I see it as a working with to improve. Just imagine a government that doesn't have a standing army that's focused on protecting itself against other outsiders. Instead, that standing army is there to work together towards help mitigate climate change. It's not that hard to imagine here in Canada because our army is designed for peacekeeping. That's kind of what it's all about. And so, the Canadian Army is busy at work every day, going all over the world to help, refugees, to help, all sorts of things. So there's another use for army that isn't revolving around war. Imagine a country where democracy, utilizing blockchain, as Greg has mentioned many times, towards making better, more informed decisions, more active democracy, where it's not so representational, but it's more direct. It's easy to imagine a government that isn't something we look at as this dark, oppressive force over us. And I do believe that we need governments still. So that's my attitude about it is, trying to work with regulators, trying to help them because there's so much help that blockchain could provide to make governments work better for the people.
Yeah.
So I think you're essentially correct. The thing that when I talk about nation states no longer being viable, it's because once you have a global technology that allows for global communication, instantaneous global communication, and you have the ability for local communities to self-coordinate and then interface directly globally with other local communities. And you have the beginnings of the understanding of how connected the ecosphere is, how globally connected the ecosphere is. Trying to draw geopolitical boundaries starts to look more and more absurd.
Yeah. I think that's going to happen. So then what is a country? What is a nation?
Exactly. Yeah. That's precise. So when I talk about critique of the nation state, it's much more about sort of inexorable trends as opposed to, any anarchist agenda.
Right.
It's just that there are these inevitable trends, and I would be really surprised if 200 years from now there's a geopolitical map encircling the globe. I would be completely shocked because there are so many ways that that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
I do think there will still be some type of cultural representation of different groups of people that can be celebrated. I see a unified planet of different cultures who it's kind of like, I don't want to trumpet up Canada because I'm actually not, that patriotic, but there's a distinction that Canadians make between what people say about the United States versus what they say about Canada. And it's something that our current prime minister's dad once said in the 60s, who was also the prime minister. and he said that in the United States they call themselves the cultural melting pot. The melting pot. So it all melts together and it creates this one thing, right?
Yeah.
In Canada, he called it more of a cultural mosaic, where we embrace it and appreciate each other's cultures, and together we make a painting, or we make a piece of art. And I think that if we can look at the planet as the future planet of the future of governments as more of a cultural mosaic, I think we're going to be better off.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is very much in alignment with the kind of view one gets from looking at ecosystems. The speciation is real. You can see it, right? There are different subspecies of birds, and they fill specific niches, and accepting that those specialties are real and they serve a function is important. And we can do the same thing in terms of human culture. It's the same kind of recognition that these different cultural adaptations have real function and purpose, and beginning to understand the function and purpose, in my opinion, that makes so much sense, right? There's a kind of humility that goes with looking at a culture and not judging it, or not even trying to pigeonhole it, but to appreciate that it has this whole web of interconnections that make it the way it is, and that studying and learning will result in a much better form of engagement and a much better utilization of all the richness that each culture brings.
Yeah, a celebration of our differences, an appreciation for each other in a deep, profound way. That's what we need to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, to me, democracy at its best is making the most of our differences as opposed to the least of our differences.
Yeah, that's a good quote. That's interesting. Yeah. There's this article I read a while back, and I wish I could find it again. It was by a blockchain theorizer, and it was talking about the difference between the concept of decentralized governance and what he was calling polycentric stewardship. And I thought it was a really interesting distinction. In many ways, I find the term decentralized governance a bit of an oxymoron. I mean, it depends on how you look at it, but there needs to still be, and gets back to what you were saying about why we are a co-op, and why the decision making, rather than being baked into the protocol, it's part of the group of people who work together on the thing. And that's one of the big reasons why I'm passionate about RChain. Isn't just the technology, it's the fact that we're a co-op. And I think that it could lead to either making decentralized governance no longer an oxymoron, or maybe, it's a bit of a different tack, maybe a different angle. And the polycentric stewardship angle is kind of another interesting thought. Is there ever going to be true decentralization, and should there be?
Well, I don't even know what it means, because if you carry it down to the level of quarks, then matter never assembles, right?
Okay.
Right. And the cell is the way it is because it has centralized some resources. Nature is always working at this edge between centralization and decentralization, and it's at the edge where you get the complexity that is life.
It's where you get life. Exactly.
So that's and I think taking that ecological perspective, that living perspective, is when a blockchain project starts to lift itself out of the morass that we usually see described in the press.
Yeah, it was like when I saw an interview with Richard Dawkins shortly after he had wrote The Selfish Gene, that book, The Selfish Gene.
Yeah.
And he's like, a lot of libertarians really, love your philosophy. They've really they looked at it as, a reaffirmation of their viewpoints. And Richard Dawkins goes like, my book isn't called The Selfish Human. It's called The Selfish Gene. I vote liberal. But to me, that's the key, right? Of what you're kind of explaining is like, that it's that intersection where life begins, where there is some centralization required.
Yeah. And really, it has to do with, like I recently watched this World Science Festival debate and discussion amongst several scientists who are looking at non-human intelligence, and their argument that intelligence forms in networks, right? And it doesn't. The network could be made of neurons, but it doesn't have to be. Right. It could be made of cutter ants, or it could be made of trees connected via a mycelial network. And so the network idea is the idea that is balancing between the central and the distributed. And so that's kind of that's the place where I think things start to get quite interesting, because you have this capacity for intelligence that doesn't exist at other interfaces.
Amen.
This is making me really think about, like, yesterday I was just noticing, I was out and about, and I was noticing that people are so stressed about their parking meters. I feel like everybody's always talking about refilling their parking meter. And I was thinking about how many, I'm sure this doesn't sound connected, but in my head it's connected. I was just thinking about how many, what the vast amount of resources that cities, invest on just giving people citations. And it's like, we have homeless people, there's trash in the ocean. We've got, we have a shortage of firefighters. Like, we have all this stuff we need to do. And instead we pay these people to just give people citations. And it's like, why? I don't understand why this happens. Like, I feel like they're hopefully in the next, decade or longer, maybe shorter, there's going to be hopefully some kind of revolution about how cities really, and how countries, and even bigger, how we deploy our resources. Because I feel like there are so many worthy places for not only like the public's ideas of what should be done, but also I don't think people want to be walking around all day giving people parking tickets. What I think they want to do is something that actually matters. And actually they feel like it's helping their community, not ruining somebody's day because their car was parked on a piece of cement for a minute too long on a random Tuesday. It's just, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. It kind of points out the absurdity.
Yeah. It just seems crazy. It's like, oh, you can't have your vehicle here for longer than some arbitrary length of time, which might be a construct anyway. I'm sure Greg could take us down that rabbit hole. But I just feel like there's so many places, there's so many great causes around the world that are so in need of our attention. And I'm really hoping to be able to help these changes happen, and also just witness a better allocation of resources, Yeah.
I've been reading this book that Shixi actually recommended. It's called Conversations with God. I've been enjoying it quite a bit. It's pretty philosophical, so I might get a little, airy here at the very end. But I'm going to read a quote from the book because I think it somehow kind of applies to what we've been talking about. Okay, here's the quote. God's greatest moment is the moment you realize you need no God. A true master is not the one with the most students, but the one who creates the most masters. A true leader is not the one with the most followers, but the one who creates the most leaders. A true king is not the one with the most subjects, but the one who leads the most to royalty. A true teacher is not the one with the most knowledge, but one who causes the most to have knowledge. And a true God is not the one with the most servants, but the one who serves the most, thereby making gods of all others.
Lovely.
Yeah, that's
Indeed.
awesome. Well,
Yeah.
that might be a really good place to end. I'm
In
absolutely
fact.
certain I cannot say anything more profound than that. At least not this early in the morning. So, are there any burning thoughts that anybody wanted to include besides that?
Let's take it out.
Okay, well, thank you all for another great conversation today. Looking forward to see what we come up with next week. If you're listening, thank you so much for tuning into the RCAST by RChain, and please make sure that you're subscribed on YouTube and following RChain on Twitter, and have a great weekend.
Ciao, everyone.
Bye, everybody.